In this episode, I want to go to the material channels of the camera projection, and I want to do this, of course, from the start in this example, and then I go to a cube where I show you exactly how each and everything works. Very simple, so you can do this very quick and get experienced with that. Okay, I have improved here a little bit the scene, and of course I have worked here along my idea that you should have the positions of the camera where it was shot to get the best results. And with that camera move, you might see also that I avoid some areas that will not work very well. As you can see here, these guys in the top left corner, they get really flat after a while, and so I exclude them to not lose my illusion here. And here you can see that tree, that should be eliminated as well, because that's pretty much a dead giveaway when you have the camera too long on that. And the balconies here on this side are gone, just eliminated, because they do not give me anything for that scene here in terms of atmosphere, mood, or whatever. They give me only headache. Of course, you can do this, just as I said in the last episode, put them into planes and whatever. I digress, and it's always a long story, so I try really to go into each and every detail once, twice, or even 3 times to make it sit. When you were following in the last episode, you have seen already that I made the reflections here, and I did them really, really heavy just to make the point. And of course, if you have noticed, and I would like if you have criticized me in that I have even in the open window areas reflections. That is, of course, maybe not the ideal, but in the moment you have 100% reflection, that works, and that was maybe a little bit the point as well. So let's hop over to Photoshop and check out what we can do else here with exactly these guys here. And I have to admit, I have created here the side view as well. So I want to give you, of course, the short rundown how we can do this. You have to set it up so this frames here perpendicular, and to the left side you see there's more and more and more distortion in it, and it gets more and more pixelated even in this preview here. And the main part is, of course, when we go back to the animation camera, the first 4x4 windows here. And when you have done your camera animation already, you have a nice prediction what you really need. Go maybe a little bit more to the side to get really a little bit safety in your work, so you can open the lens a little bit more or widen the view, to name it differently. So back to this camera here, and we go again here to Windows and to Projection Man, or if you have established here a little icon, that would help too. Control or Command click here on this, and now you remember maybe coverage rendering. And the rendering would be all we need here, because we want to set up the material maybe manually. And so I do this here, just camera side 02. And that would be all I need. I don't need even here the alpha channel, but it sets it up in the material, so I go with that. Perfect. And everything is fine. Now we can go over to Photoshop, and it does it for us already. And we can check with the rulers here just if everything is as expected. I think it's fairly good. That means we have a very fast forward here with our work. It should go very fast with selection and fill these guys in. In the other pictures, we had this as background, and I have different layers here already prepared. This would be here now the first selection with all the window areas here that I need. And then we have here a little bit blur because it was way too sharp. And then here just everything without. So now we have the openings where we can see in the house. That would be for the transparent channel, the guy. And this one here would be for the reflection. So is that really the fast and the last way to do it? No, I would go normally and say, make a copy here, and then blur this even more. And you can go here to filters again, and go here radically to that blur with maybe this amount. It's maybe even too less, that's too much, just so you can get an idea of it. It shouldn't be overlap in it. And then when you go here to maybe darken, you get here these nice little gradients from exactly the frames and from the major blur here. With a shift click on this guy, we can go then and merge layers, and we get something that works here for our bump map very nicely. Similar to that, we can have also just a dirt map, because these windows are most of the time not really clean. So we could add here very fine noise over it, and maybe we can use even this here as mask to have more in the frame, the dirt, and less where the rain washes is maybe down. And when we move this a little bit down, then where the rain can't really hit the window, it makes even more sense. You have to test all of that and find your own style, your own idea. Here again, reference images are very important. So whenever you see a building, take your longest lens, shoot only the windows, and examine how the reflection is, how the transparency is, how much dirt there is, and maybe if there are other stuff on it, crackles, something from birds or so, labels, and whatever people do to windows. There's a lot of stuff possible, and whatever helps you to convince the audience that they believe that's a real window, that's exactly the way to go. Okay. So that would be part number 1. So I try to create part 2 very fast and quickly. What I want to do here is just a cube, and I want to place anything that we can think of on a cube. Maybe not all, but just for the sake of argument, what you can do with the channels. And of course, there's a lot of stuff possible, including normal maps. Try this out. If nothing works for you, normal maps might help. Anyway, so first of all, we have to go to our projection man, and I'm so used to my little shortcut here. Anyway, so I click on my cube, go to cameras, because I want to have a complete service here, not just a coverage rendering. And then I go to new projection camera, new coverage render, or coverage render. What I want to have here is, first of all, that I get an image here in my cube, and I call this here for C for channel and 1. That's all. I have here the need to stay with Photoshop, obviously, so there's not really an option. What I would suggest in any case, only maybe for alpha channels, and there I have my concerns as well. 8-bit, don't do it, just don't do it. Because hard disks are so cheap and computers are fast, there is really no reason to limit yourself to such a format. I try to stay calm here. Think of all the work that you do, and then you press it in 256 steps of gray values only. That's not really an option. 16-bit is the least amount that you should have. And for displacement maps, they don't work really well with 8-bit. 16 is at least a must-have. 32-bit is my favorite, but for argument's sake, I go here with 16 for the moment. So what I want to have here is all just default. And so I have only to press here OK, and things work nicely. Okay, I get here a camera, I get a material, the material is in the material editor. So, and I'm here with my cube in Photoshop. Everything worked fine. And what we want to do here is, of course, to check out just the different material channels and how they work together. And I have used here this, of course, on purpose with the fillets. You should do this one time with 8-bit to see the displacement, the bumps and all of that, and how the reflection finally works with that. You will be surprised. Anyway, you know my little rant about this. So the first one would be here now, the reflection. And I do this pretty quick because you will do this maybe on your own in your own project. And I go here just with a white little brush stroke over that one, just to give you an idea how it works. Reflections, and I want to have, of course, everything black behind it. So I call up a new layer, and Command or Control Delete gives me this here. I have the reflection on top, so I can keep that name, merge layers, and I have the black behind the white. That would be the reflection. So let's take a look. We want to have transparency. Another layer, rename this here wisely, so I know later on what's all about. And I want to go here with this line one time around. You get here already my idea. That's maybe not a good painting, but you get where I'm heading to. And here again, I want to have the black in the background. Select with a shift click this, merge layers, and done. So the next step would be then maybe that we have some material here in terms of bump. This time I put here directly my black into it. I have to get a layer to make that possible. And another trick is here, of course, to lighten this up so I can see my background. And then I can paint here just on this. Should work now. Lighten up. It's set to behind, sorry. So lighten up works here nicely. And that gives me already here my bump. And you will see how that works, if at all, when we have no lights in the scene and so on. That's a little test here, of course. And so I want to have maybe here in the middle a little bump displacement channel. So I go here again, and I have to remember that I have to set this here back to normal as usual. So this is not what I want. Black in the background. To see everything here, I set it to lighten. And then I can go here with my white into it, and maybe just to get a nice little gradient here, so I can see how the sub-polygon displacement works here. That's maybe also not the best drawing here, but you get my idea. This would be displacement, and maybe with an S, that makes more sense then. So, okay, so we could go on and on with all the channels that we have. We can influence other areas, and this time I leave the background here for the luminosity, for the luminance channel. And we have transparency, we have the bump, we have reflection. That means we are only left with maybe to save it. Okay, just press save, hop back to Cinema 4D, and go into the material here. In the luminance channel, we have to reload the image. We could do this, of course, here by clicking on cube, and reload bitmap has the same effect here. Okay, so now we have everything on top of each other. I have to click here to get this out of it. What I want to have here in the luminance channel, I want to select, of course, only the background. I want to have this image here in the transparency channel, drag this to the texture after it has switched, switch it on, go to select, and now the naming convention makes here a lot of sense. Trans, of course, with an S, not with an Z. And I can see here already my first result. And again, I can drag this here to a reflection, let go of it when it is there, switch it on, click on select, and reflection. And then I should get here a little bit reflective material, always over the facets here. And of course, I want to have this in the bump channel. We will see if that works at all. And I have to go here to select and bump. Next one is then the displacement map. And then we are already set. Just put this in, crank this up a little bit, and of course, do we have this? No, we have to set it, displace, one click, and done. So we have this button here. So we have now here luminance checked to on, we have transparency, we have reflection, we have bump, we have the alpha channel, which I don't need at the moment, and we have the displacement. Let's have just a little rendering and see how it works here. That looks quite different, and that has to do with the displacement here. It's centered, but it is set to black in the image here. So we need intensity here instead of. If we have standard, we need 50% gray exactly on the point to have no movement. Now we can see here we get some displacement here very nicely. We can't really see what we have here in terms of change in the material. So I suggest to take just the sky, maybe here the cirrus, or let's take something with more color in it, merge, and render this thing again. And then we get more ideas what we have done here finally. And so we have here now a nice transparent, we have a nice reflection here over that, and no bump. The bump is of course something that indicates already that we have to deal here with a concept that doesn't allow directly to work with those things. The luminance channel gives already light into it, and it overrides everything that is a little bit darker. We have of course here in the material, we have of course in the material a specular, but it's switched off because normally we don't deal with those things in the way when the luminance is the most important part of the camera projection. And this indicates already that we have to deal normally with two different philosophies in camera projection. One is mainly based on the luminance. That means we take images and paintings and everything else that has already every light information in it. And so it's very nice for background images and for everything that has no interaction with any light source during an animation, if it is a camera animation or just a character animation. Everything that has baked light in it, like camera projection in this way, has a problem with interaction, of course. When we go to the other philosophy of camera projection, then we talk about everything is in the color channel. And for photorealistic images, that means we take images from a facade, from a building, when we have a complete overcasted sky. So we get a huge diffusion light into our scene. Or if we take just the north side of a building where no sun is finally getting into it. And so we have a nearly shadow-free area. There's of course always something going on, but in truth, when we have then a displacement or just geometry even for the whole detail area, we can introduce the shadows again. We could also go steps further to get the shadow then finally back into it, but that's a longer story. So two different mindsets, color and luminance. There is a split. So, and to go now here with the specular into it is maybe something between these two schools of projection cameras or projection methods, because the specular introduces something that gives maybe away that you have projected all on a single cube instead of a very faceted object for representing the whole building. The idea of camera projection, as I understand it, and there are different mindsets of course available, is to get away with the least amount of polygons. So we take advantage of the details in the image, which finally excludes that we gain shadows from that geometry, and which excludes of course that we have here anything that goes with a light source, maybe inside of this idea here. So I want to go here with one light source again, and I go to attributes and I crank this up really high so we can see what's going on with the specular. You see that's already way over the top. And when I render this, I get here everything super bright. That's maybe just an indicator that we can play with it, but we have to crank up the whole thing. The next part is of course we get here facets in, and that has sometimes to do with the objects, sometimes it has to do with the projection that we had here on it, because from my point of view the biggest problem here with super bright lights and the textures is we try to get from the projection the sharpest image possible, and we don't want to have that the fong shading is working here now on our image and smooth it out. But at the same time, we have here to deal with light sources. So have an eye on that. 1000 here gives it immediately away. That's, by the way, also one reason to not use 8-bit images, because that gives it very fast away when there's bending in the image itself. So it's also here with 100%. Not a good idea. So I normally try to avoid specular highlights in things like that, based on my ideal of less polygons in the scene and less details, which means I have to pay these details always with a lot of work. The ideal is, of course, we build things, we project it on it, and we get the illusion. This works nice here now. It's just projected, and we see it, of course, from the camera. We have done it. We can rotate this here a little bit, and we get a different idea then. So we have discussed, of course, the two mindsets, and we have seen that displacement works. The bump map itself is also in case for specular. It doesn't really work with luminance, just to give you that idea. We could go with normal mapping. That means we render from this camera just a multipass out and get the information. And when we destroy then a little bit the normal map, we get all the information that we need, maybe for bumpy windows and all of that. But it's not that simple, because based on my understanding of camera projection, we want to have a sharp image, but we want also to have the phone working on it. And for camera projection, the image wins here, not the phone. And there I think we should stay with what we get here: transparency, reflection, displacement if needed, and of course luminance. So that's pretty much in a nutshell what we have here. Alpha channel works nice. I don't know if glow is really a good idea, because glow has some limitations anyway. And as we have seen, the diffusion works here very nicely when we want to paint dark areas or light into a texture without affecting the texture in the first place. Okay, that sums it up for a nice little round view. You might explore this area a little bit more, find different ways, different options. Maybe you bake all of that in what we have done with camera projection and overcome some limitations. One option is, of course, always given. You take this cube here into an hyperNURBS and smooth it out, but that goes against the idea that we have nearly no polygons in the scene. So I have prepared everything, and I don't want to waste your time that you watch me doing that here. Of course, it's all based on this pre-work. Sometimes I leave it sharp in it, sometimes blurred. And the transparency here is just prepared with some gray strokes on it, or just black and the opacity down. And the bump itself, I was maybe here a little bit sloppy, but just blur one of these textures and then set this layer to darken with one of these here underneath, and then you get exactly this when you merge them. So you have a package here, and the same package is here, of course, for bump and for transparency, and you can reuse them, of course. What works for bump is maybe also good for the transparency and whatever for reflection. Try it out, play with it. You need to get the results that you need for your scene. It's always a little bit different if the city is super clean or dark or dirty. It depends all on these parameters. So let's go over to Cinema 4D. And here you can see we have already a reflection in it. And what I want to give you on the way, of course, is that the brightness slider here needs to be to 0 when you want to dial in the reflection or transparency for each channel, because in a moment you just crank this up or down, you get maybe more information from this here. As you can see, it gets more reflective here, more transparent or opaque. And that is not the idea that you want to have, because you want to dial in a lower value and not crank everything else up. So this needs to be on 0, and then you have a nice live here just to dial in the white tones of that texture up or down. That works nicely, and same happens here, of course, for the reflection. And the bump itself, it should be here, of course, very low but it depends on you. The older the cities, the more distortion is in the windows. But of course, newer cities have these double pane windows where you have a vacuum between and they get attracted to each other based on that. So you have always these concave reflection in it, and from the other side a little bit lower, that convex reflection when you want to make it really precise. Anyway, this is the whole idea here, and the bump map works here of course based on the reflections that we have in the scene. If we have nothing that interacts with the scene, the bump would be maybe not really needed. I have rendered this here one time out with some problems in it, and as you can see here, I have some fluorescent light in it, and I have done this with the cloner object with some planes and a very simple texture just like this. That could be nicer here with roundings and maybe some other stuff, but for the purpose of a tutorial, this is just nice. And you can see here these fluorescent light gives a nice depth into the room. The problems here are the traffic lights, the tree, the lamp pole, and then here the balconies. I have taken these out, but for the purpose of demonstration I have left them in. And of course this is all based on one image here, what you can see at the moment, and that is normally not enough to go really into all the details here. That if you would make maybe a feature film, you would do this, but you wouldn't do this with one image, of course. You would go there and shoot like crazy to get really a super high res and super precise, and then you can pull off all these perspective distortion based finally here on a new geometry. So I will render this once more without all these details here, and then we go into another tutorial and I show you how to put them back in. So, and here I have the version without the stuff on the side here. And of course, what I would like to do here is just to point out to, let's have a look here to this window. When I move this slowly, you can see the reflection is not just on a flat plane. The bump works here nicely to our advantage, and it gives a nice touch of realism into that picture here. And that's really great. And to have here these windows where we have it open gives also just a nice feeling to me. I have some that have reflection in it, so you can see that looks a little bit weird here. But that's an easy fix. It's just a black and white image, maybe a minute or so, and it's done. And again, we have here, of course, details. I have pulled this one a little bit outside in the geometry, but I go with the camera only then to this area when the perspective is so that we say, okay, that works for me, it looks nice. And that follows the philosophy that I have here at the moment as main target. We have one shot for the camera that finally captures it, that comes close to the perspective, so we have nearly no need to create extra geometry, as I said before. Again, for a feature film, even this, I would put way more work into it. I want to give you here the quick and easy method to discuss all of these channels, what works, what doesn't work, and how to set up something like that. Okay. That sums it up, and see you in the next part. Thanks for listening.